Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. My name is Danny Johnson.
And I'm Stacia Garr.
And today we had the opportunity to talk to Melissa Reeve, who actually came to us. We usually find our own podcast guests, but she has such an interesting take on the topic that we discussed today that we invited her on. She's the author of a book called Hyper-Adaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native, which should be out in May, and we'll put a link in the show notes. But as we had this discussion, Stacia, what stood out to you?
She did a couple of years of research on this, which we always appreciate. And she came out with a good old-fashioned maturity model, which I also appreciate. And I don't say that negatively at all. But I did really appreciate the clarity that her model helped us see. So there's 5 levels. The first level was what she called foundation, which is really about kind of laying the foundation for understanding AI, communicating, aligning on it internally. Her next level up was optimization. So how do you kind of take those foundations and start to see some impact on the business? Third is agents and automation. And that is really about how do we start to kind of truly go from, let's say writing an email, which might be something with optimization, to actually making a process that people don't have to be as involved with through agents and automation. And those 3 are what she called kind of a base camp. And so really the foundation of, too long.
Stacia, what stood out to you?
Well, she did a couple of years of research and came up with a maturity model, which I loved. We don't always hear of folks who have done that kind of level of background work. So I think that was cool. And her model had 5 different levels. So it begins with what she calls foundation, and then optimization, agents, and automation. And those are the base of and where she tends to see most organizations playing. And then the next 2 levels were what she called rewiring and hyper-adaptive. And there's, that I think having just a model to start to put on where organizations are today and where you might want to be going, I think was super useful. So that was one thing. Another thing that struck me was how she talked about how this is not all new. Like, we have gone through major technological changes, certainly the arrival of the PC in companies, also the internet, and how that can help give us a roadmap to what we should do next. The third thing was she talked about how she sees this coming to place, and it's very much so aligned with our thinking around systems thinking and building in place process and structure. But here was where I actually kind of had some questions, because as you and I have talked about, whenever we see a huge amount of complexity and complex process, it makes me step back and say, is this really how this is all going to go down? And after talking to her, I just wonder if there's a third way that we're going to adapt this AI that none of us can see right now, but isn't necessarily this overly complex, process-heavy approach. I don't know, but it was just a thought that struck me.
I agree with you. Like, we had a chance to talk a little bit about this before we recorded the intro. And one of the things that I loved about her book is it is entirely focused on the organization itself, and outlines ways to sort of think through the steps you need to take in order to integrate AI into your organization. But there is an awful lot of complexity today, for sure. And we have seen AI move from sort of coach on the shoulder, like helping you do your job better in the current context, to now agents doing parts of jobs and people being laid off. And it's complex. It's complex when we look at that job analysis and the task analysis of what it takes to get work done, and trying to then integrate agents into it. It's a lot. So I think you're probably right. We're going to continue to evolve this. There will be another way. I also really loved the fact that she talked about AI success not necessarily being tech related. A little bit of it is the tech, obviously, because it's available, but 80% is the culture and the processes that you put in place and all of those types of things. And then the other thing that I really loved is, as you mentioned, she brought in a lot of ideas that exist outside of the AI discussion. So we've talked about organizing around work, people around work instead of work around people. We've talked about needing to vastly change the way that we think about work moving forward. All of these ideas have sort of come together, and it's a sort of quick hit list of really good management theories kind of rolled in under one discussion on AI, which I found incredibly useful and helpful. And then I just loved her background. She started on the shop floors at Toyota and moved through a marketing career and got curious about this. And as you mentioned, wrote a book. It is a really great book. It'll be out in May. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it's also a fantastic discussion. We recommend that you follow her, Melissa Reeve. You can find her on LinkedIn. And we also recommend that you buy her book and have a listen here. So, Melissa, welcome to Workplace Stories.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. We were reflecting on this a little bit this week. One of our mega trends for 2026 is that AI is in the air, meaning we're no longer necessarily thinking about AI as a thing, but it's just being integrated into everything and the way we work and all those good things. And as maybe a result, we've seen AI tacked onto everything, from the vendors that we see to the organizations that we talk to. AI is bolted onto jobs and organizations the way that they currently exist, not necessarily the way that they need to in order to take advantage of AI. And it kind of feels like leaders are hitting a wall. They're realizing that maybe, and I think this is your terminology, that AI doesn't fit in the 20th century operating models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't expect 21st century results with a 20th century operating model. Yeah.
And so I was thrilled that you reached out. We usually don't accept guests that reach out. We usually go find our own. But when you reached out, you had such an interesting sort of hypothesis and model that we definitely wanted to talk through, because we talk to so many organizations that are hitting walls with respect to AI right now. So again, welcome. Thanks for being here. And as we get into this, I was wondering if you could just give us some of your background, because it's slightly unusual for a book of this type.
It is. Yeah. It wasn't a straight line. And maybe that's just indicative of the age we're in. I was listening to a keynote the other day, and she says AI was going to change who will be able to do what. And I feel like that is what's happened here. And I like to say that the journey to this book started on the factory floor in Tokyo, when I was watching, it was Hino Motor Company, which is a subsidiary of Toyota. And they were using the Toyota production system, which anybody who's in lean or agile probably has heard of this. And what it taught me is that small changes at all levels of the organization can really impact the overall system. And that is my foundation in this little crash course in industrial engineering that I took during my time when I lived in Japan, served as a through line through my career. And so then, probably not surprising, in the early days of agile marketing, I was a marketing executive for many years, and really leaned into agile marketing and systems thinking. I joined an organization called Scaled Agile, which was an advocate of the Scaled Agile framework, which was a way of taking agile into the world's largest enterprises. And there I was just exposed to many, many experts in whether it was Peter Senge in developing learning organizations, or people who were steeped in Lean and Six Sigma, just a lot of different angles. And somehow that seeped into my skin. When Agile came to bear, I actually was triggered by something called DevOps. And what DevOps is, the automation of the software delivery pipeline. And I thought to myself, bingo, that's what's going to happen everywhere. And so what lessons can we take from factory automation, from DevOps, from everything I've learned up until this point? And I spent about 18 months researching not only everything that I'd learned to date, but also success patterns from early adopters of AI. That's where the hyper-adaptive model was born.
I kind of love that. First of all, because you're one of us. Stacia and I are very much systems thinkers. Don't fix the people, fix the systems for the people. But also because I am a green belt.
Ah, awesome.
Yes. I'm back from my engineering days. And so, yeah, it's interesting that you learned it on the Toyota floor.
Awesome background. You know, Danny and I come from backgrounds that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find us where we are today. But One question I wanted to get out of the way before we jump in is, why do you think people should listen to you when it comes to AI? And kind of what moment particularly made you realize that this AI movement isn't really about tech?
Yeah. So I appreciate the question because, we're at this moment where I feel like there are some AI charlatans out there. Anybody can hang out their shingle and say, like, I'm an AI expert. I always get a little bit wary of those folks because, for most of us, AI hasn't been around long enough to really declare yourself an expert. And myself really included. We're all learning together. But what I've done that many people have not done is the research. And that I had some really dedicated time, almost 2 years, to delve into the research that's been done, academic research, to really research the companies and those success patterns. The company that I profile in stage 5 of the book, which is the most advanced stage, is a company out of China called Ping An Insurance. And their AI journey started in 2008. And so it's been going on for many, many years. And I feel like that's a point of view that not a lot of people are able to bring to the table.
I dig it. I love that you were curious about something and you went after it and that you dedicated so much time to it. I think we briefly mentioned in the intro that you wrote a book, and I want to give a plug to that book. It's called Hyperadaptive. When does it come out?
So it comes out in May.
Okay.
Yep, it's Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native.
Okay, so we're getting you a little bit early, but I'm wondering if you can give us maybe a thesis statement for that book.
Sure. So the premise of the book is that most organizations today are what I call linear organizations. So you have strategy to execution, you have concept to delivery, and the way most organizations are operating today is a lot of handoffs between those levels of the organization and between the functions. And that made total sense in last century. What's happening now is we have AI native organizations that don't have that structure, that don't have that legacy, and they're what I call AI native organizations. And they're also hyperadaptive, which is the ability to sense and respond in real time. So the question that I'm trying to answer in the book is, if you are one of these organizations that are linear, how do you iteratively and incrementally rewire yourself to become more AI native? Because we know this isn't going to happen overnight. You can't just flip a switch and become this newly structured organization. And so it's really a blueprint from how do you go from here to there.
As you describe that, what it makes me think of is truly the movement from the 20th century organization to an agile organization. So is agile in some ways just a reasonable proxy for the AI organization?
I don't think so. There are elements of that iterative and incrementalism that I've borrowed from agile. But when you think about the structure that I'm advocating for, I'll just give you a little preview of what it looks like to be an AI native enterprise. We start to organize more and more by value streams. And that's the crux of the organization are these cross-functional value streams. Layered into that, though, you also have what I call innovation circles. And so think of that as your VC arm of the firm. And anybody can pitch their idea for these innovation circles. They might leave their value stream. We've got careers that look more like portfolios than career ladders. Then we have kind of a stable base that takes care of keeping the lights on and the power on and the infrastructure running. And so that's how I'm envisioning the AI native enterprise of the future. It's got some of those principles of Agile, but I think when you hear that, you're not like, oh, that's just, I don't think you say like, oh, that's an Agile organization.
Okay. Thank you for that.
So why do you think, just maybe to get us kicked off, why do you think that most organizations are failing at AI? What's making it so hard?
It's brand new, and we're all figuring it out together, including myself. I really feel like we are just underfunding what I call the support structures. So there's two really big things. One is we don't have a firm grounding in why we're doing it. There's the leading companies do. So I love to cite Moderna, who said, we're going to release 10 new drugs. I think it's 15 new drugs in 5 years with the help of AI, when a typical pharma company only releases one drug every 10 years. Like that is an amazing North Star. Everybody in the organization knows why they are there and what they should be doing with AI. So I think that's the first part. And then the second part is these support structures, which when you think about the rollout of the PC in the 90s, so another powerful technology that was rolled out to the entire organization, we spun up the IT help desk. We spun up IT departments. We haven't figured out those infrastructure pieces yet. And that's part of the question that the hyperadaptive model answers, which is what are those support structures?
So can you talk a little bit about what this model is and what the different stages are and how you are thinking about this organization?
Sure. So again, if we think about the from to, which thanks for that setup, that was a great setup. How do you start rewiring the organization? Well, in the beginning, we need to do a couple of foundational things. We need to spin up what I call dynamic governance. So a lot of companies I talk to, they've got pieces of this, right? They're like, oh, well, we have an AI council, it's cross-functional. That's a great start. And what we need to do is we need to shift that then from traditional ways of thinking about governance, which is we're going to meet for X amount of time, we're going to set a policy, we're going to put it up on the intranet, to a much more dynamic form of governance, which says we may have the centralized committee to start evaluating guardrails. We need another layer underneath that to translate those into functional areas. And then we need our frontline guardians of that governance so that if somebody has a question in real time, they know who to ask. And maybe what we do is we stick our AI policies into its own custom GPT so that if I'm on the front line and I'm like, is it okay for me to use AI for this? I can get an instant answer. And that's continually being updated so that we are meeting on a much more frequent basis. So we need that kind of a foundation to set the guardrails around AI. And then we need to start identifying our AI leads. Again, something that many organizations have done. What they're not doing that I'm seeing is they're not providing support for these leads. It's not, I like to say if it's repeatable, it's scalable. And so what is that repeatable process for an AI lead? How do you become one? How do you learn what you need to learn as an AI lead? Where do you go from being an AI lead? And so that's really the foundational stage. And then after that, you start to integrate AI into your workflows. Again, lots of companies are thinking about how to do this. And then I start to spin up what I call this network of activation hubs. And these are the people who, it's kind of a flavor of a center of excellence, except we've got a network of them because this is the entire organization. It's housing the training, the measurement. How do we know we're moving the needle on AI? It's also your sensing mechanism that's looking at all the AI going out there and figuring out like what's relevant to my part of the organization. And then from there, we move into agentic AI. So AI agents. And there I spin up a support mechanism that I call the AI Impact Hub, because we know that when we're talking about agentic AI, we're talking about moving people from doing the task to building, monitoring, and maintaining the agent that does the task. Well, that sounds like pretty significant rewiring of roles. So we need to take a little breath there. And it's the role of the AI Impact Hub to really start to evaluate this job change. What's going on with these jobs? We start to rewire the organization in stage 4. We scale these value stream experiments that we were talking about. And then by stage 5, we've got orchestrated value streams.
So just to repeat the 5, and then I want to talk a little bit about the way that you've got them organized. The first one is foundation, laying a foundation for AI. And that's basically like getting everybody on the same page about it and making sure everybody understands where they can find information on it. Second one is process optimization and task augmentation. We see tons of organizations here right now. How do you figure out how the work is actually done versus how you think it ought to be done? And then the third is getting your agents to actually work and creating a hub to help your agents. You're creating and managing hubs just like you create and manage people. And so it requires an organization to help you do that. or technology, perhaps. And then stage 4 is rewiring the organization, which I can't wait to jump into a little bit. And then the fifth one is hyperadaptivity. Hyperadaptivity. And so in your book, you actually divide them into 2 big chunks. You call the first one base camp and the second one emerging frontier. And I'm just curious about that sort of split. Why are the first 3 in base camp and the other 2 in the emerging frontier?
Yeah, so the first 3 are pretty well trodden path. Many, many organizations, many examples of those first 3 of getting us from 0 to agentic AI. And then when we start rewiring the hierarchy into value streams, that's where the signals are pointing to. And I do have some great examples in the book. They're fewer and they're far between. And so I wanted to frame that as here's where the signals are pointing to. And I'll have higher confidence as I see more and more organizations move in that direction.
Okay. So can I ask, so we are talking to lots of organizations and they're trying to figure this out. I'm not even sure many of them have gone through stage 1, which is like making sure everybody's on the same page about that. You know what I mean? I know many organizations have not figured out their process optimization and task augmentation. I know they're working on that. And then the third one, I think you put it very eloquently, right? Like somebody's got to corral these and manage these agents. Most organizations haven't spun up something to help them do that. And so the majority of the organizations that we're speaking to, while we have seen some really interesting things, haven't put the base camp in place in order to be successful.
That's right. Yeah, and what I'm seeing is that they're actually trying to do everything at once. So because there are usually parts of the organization that have been dinking around with AI for a while, and they're like, hey, we can orchestrate agents, and it's too much too soon. But they try and do it anyway because everybody's so hungry to see the results of AI. And so there's so much pressure to move the organization in that direction. Like just before this call, I was talking to an organization. It's like, yeah, we came in, we tried to do this big thing. It failed. And there's part of your 80% failure rate of these pilots is biting off more than you can chew.
Okay. We do megatrends every year, and our AI, not surprisingly, has been in one of the trends for the last 3 years. Last year, it was moving from experimentation more to sort of organized AI within organizations. But there has been this conversation around experimentation and putting it in the hands of people so that they can experiment. And that's been going on for a couple of years. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, given your structure here.
Yeah, so we need some play, but I've written a few articles on like go play with AI is not a strategy because we're all so busy. Unless we have some of that dedicated time to go play and we know what to do with that time, it's often wasted effort. And so that's where that AI North Star comes in. And that's where I've got a framework I call focus, which helps you sort through the use cases, because that's the other part of AI. There's so much you can do with AI. You actually need some sort of mechanism to sort through what should I be doing with AI. And not only in my personal realm, but in the realm of my team and in the realm of my team of teams, because I come from this marketing background. What use of it is it to create 400 versions of an ad if it's going to get stuck in legal approval?
True.
And so we really need to look at our workflows in totality to figure out where AI can truly make a dent.
So even before, and Stacia, jump in because I'm just going to go nuts because I have so many questions here. But even before you get to like process optimization and task augmentation, there is the gigantic problem in most organizations. We don't even understand how work gets done. Like we haven't even figured out how work gets done, right? You don't know, you have to ask Peggy down in accounting to give you the thing so that you can plug it into the thing. You know what I mean? And so how have you seen organizations approach this? Because what we're actually talking about, I'm assuming, is some of the things that we've been talking about for a couple of years, which is like task analysis and skill optimization and those types of things.
And just simple process mapping. Yeah. And this is why I see some engineering teams pulling ahead of their business counterparts, because they're a little bit more familiar with their processes. Maybe they've done some value stream mapping. Maybe they've done some process mapping as part of a digital transformation, as part of an agile transformation. But to your point, you ask Peggy down in accounting, like what her process is, and it's all locked in her head. And so one of the things that I do with teams is we get an entire team. We we take a look at a process that's been pre-identified as a potential for AI augmentation. We map that process. And part of what we're doing there is teaching people how to do that process mapping, how to improve processes, because what we know for sure is we're going to have to revisit those over and over and over again as AI takes hold. Because AI is not standing still, and the process we map today is going to look different 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now.
If you're a senior people leader, you know the hard part isn't finding ideas. It's deciding which ones are worth acting on. That's why Red Thread created Summit 2026. It's not a conference, it's a small, invitation-only working retreat. On June 23rd, senior HR leaders will gather in Snowbird, Utah for 3 days of guided, peer-driven work grounded in research. No keynotes, no vendor pitches, no passive audiences. Leaders will leave having strengthened people strategies they've been grappling with for years, with clearer direction on what to change, what to stop, and what to double down on. If you want to be part of that conversation, learn more and request an invitation over at redthreadresearch.com.
So one of the things I've been really interested in recently related to this is this idea of decision tracing. So it being much more about what the decisions are that are made and why they're made and by whom they're made versus like the process itself. So as you think about this process mapping, where does decision tracing fit into that? And do you see that potentially being eventually more important because the process matters, I would potentially argue, less than the outcome that you're trying to get to?
Absolutely on the outcome, +1 on that. I like to say that jobs are made up of tasks, processes, decisions, and human interactions. And so I think when we're talking about that process mapping, we're actually talking about all of those dimensions, right? So what are the tasks being done? The processes, like how does that flow? What are the decisions that have to be made? And what are the human interactions? And we need to deconstruct that exactly for the reasons you're talking about, which is we know AI can do some tasks. We know that AI can do parts of processes. We know that AI can augment some decisions and even make them, if you're talking about like automated bidding on your Google AdWords, like that's an automatable decision within parameters, right? But there's other decisions that can't be or shouldn't be automated. And so I think part of that sussing out what decisions are being made is really identifying the types of decisions that are being made. And is it suitable for injection of AI or augmentation, or is this hands off? We need humans driving this boat.
So can I push here just a little bit, because what Stacia just said and what you just said are really interesting. We had a woman on our podcast, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, Corinne Pagano, who brought up a really interesting point of view, which is mapping your tasks makes no sense because everything is changing so quickly. It's hard to do that. You know what I mean? It once you get it done, it's like defining skills in an organization, or it's done by the time it's not valid by the time you get it done. And kind of going back to what Stacia was talking about, this idea of decision making and who makes those decisions, is there a world where you don't actually have to map the process? Is there a world where you can be like, okay, that's what I want over there, that gets you out of the minutia of figuring out all the things of the way that you used to do it, because that doesn't matter anymore, and saying there's a better way to do this?
Yeah, and there's a few things you're touching on there. One is I actually see people who are in the process mapping space. There's software technologies who are looking at using AI to help map those processes so it's not a painful exercise. You get 80% of the way there very, very quickly.
But we forget about Peggy in accounting.
Yeah. And yet, many of those processes, like the computers are smart enough to know, like, here's approximately how it goes. And I think that's actually still a useful exercise, even though it'll change for the time being, just to get people thinking in that direction. And then I also hear in that question, we've got augmentation versus reinvention. We're going to have to completely reinvent our processes. And so why are we talking about augmenting our processes when really what we want to do is reinvent them? And so how do you balance that? And to me, it's a little bit of a crawl, walk, run, fly. The reinventing is the flying. And if you don't take the time to really figure out how to crawl and walk, it gets hard just to fly.
I think there's a question that's been rattling around my brain is Danny and I talk about skills and tasks and process mapping and all this stuff, which is if I'm running a business, I just want the thing to go better, faster, and more efficient. And those of us who love thinking about how work works are totally enamored with this. And I wonder almost if there's a point at which leaders are just ugh, this is just too much. All these layers, all these this, all this, that. I can't care enough because it's not bringing in revenue yet. So have you heard, or kind of one, what's your response to that? And two, are you hearing some of that pushback? Because it's at the same time, we have leaders who are AI is the future, AI is the future. And so I don't really know where the balance is, but my gut, fully acknowledging it's my gut, is that once things get overly complicated or complex, business leaders tend to pull back and just say, no, this isn't getting us where we need to go.
Well, what I hear you describing is actually the gap between strategy and execution, especially in a large organization. You generally have leaders who have no idea why things aren't getting done. I don't care if it's AI or if it's why this thing can't get out the door faster. And they keep putting the pressure on it. This has been going on for a long time. And then you have a layer of middle management who's in the middle saying trying to connect that high level strategy into execution. And they understand the challenges that the front line is facing, that the front line actually has to deal with the reality of these processes. And they have to deal with the reality of AI technology isn't a panacea. And there's a lot of hype being in the press around it. And I'll just give you another example on this call I just got off of because it's top of mind. They spent a significant amount of human capital, money, and time building a very sophisticated automation that got them 70% of the way there. And they were but we needed to be 100% of the way there for it to have actually worked. And what happened is the team got a little bit burned by AI and burned out by AI. And luckily, it was a team of 12. So the leader of the organization saw the pain, saw the challenge, saw the disconnect. But if you were separated by a few levels of hierarchy and you had just spent the money and seen how much time it took, you would be why did we spend all that money? Where's the ROI? So I feel in my mind, it's a little bit of that disconnect between strategy and execution.
How much more tolerance do you think organizations have for figuring this out?
Great question. Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful that, there's the trough of disillusionment, right? So we go through the hype cycle. AI is going to fix everything. We realize how hard it is. We go through the trough of disillusionment. We reset and we realize that, it's going to actually take more work, more support structure, more investment in the people side, not just the technology side, to really make this thing sing. There's enough upside on that I think people will stick at it. And there's starting to be enough wins that people realize it can be done. I don't think we're there quite yet, Danny.
Okay. Well, maybe this is more of an observation, and this is raw data, people, so please don't quote me on this. But we have a survey out in the field to L&D professionals where we've asked them about their budget for next year. And what we're basically hearing is budget's staying the same. But at the same time, we're seeing these massive layoffs of L&D, the people functions are just losing people like crazy. You know what I mean? And so organizations appear to be moving their budget from people tech right now. And I'm wondering how long you think it's going to be before that kicks them in the butt. Because what's going to happen, as you mentioned, is we got to get the people in place to put the system in place to make the tech work.
I think it's short-sighted.
Okay.
I think the pendulum will swing back. Maybe it's an optimistic or unrealistic view. But for example, there was just a presentation by Bain and Company that I was looking at, and they were talking about, if you think about 100%, and they said 10% of AI success is the algorithm, and another 20% is the technology, the exact tools you use. 70% is the people. And this is what successful organizations, the ones that aren't failing 80% of the time, are realizing. And I think, if Bain's out there saying it, I've heard it other places as well. That's what's happening is people are realizing, oh, it's the people just as it always was. And so these layoffs, I think people will get redeployed. I think it won't necessarily look the same as it did, but I do think people will start to figure out, oh, we need to reallocate these people in different ways because they have some really durable skills that are important.
So, Melissa, this is a fantastic discussion, and we want to get into the rewiring of the organization and hyper-realization as well. But let's just take a quick break and ask you a few questions so that our audience can get to know you a little bit.
Cool.
Okay, first one is, if you could take a prop from any movie set, what would it be?
I love the DeLorean. I'm a child. I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, and I love this idea of time travel. And wouldn't it be cool if we could time travel to 2040 even and see how much of this AI is hype and see if we finally have flying cars?
All right, we're going to turn to one of my favorites, which is ice cream. If you invented an ice cream flavor, what ingredients would it have and what would it be called?
Well, I'm going to be a little self-ice cream serving here and call it the hyper-adaptive swirl. One, because I think it's just kind of a fun name. And the colors that I see are a little bit of cherry, a little bit of lime, a little bit of chocolate. And of course, that's got to be all swirled together.
It'd be very colorful. I like it.
My son would love it. Those are his 3 favorite flavors.
Awesome.
All right. Final question. What would you title your biography?
I think I would call it Reinvent Yourself, Reinvent Your Work. And I like that because, one, I feel like it's a reflective of my journey, which we've covered. But I also wanted to send that message out to people that the world is no longer a static place and just count on reinventing yourself several times, whether it's your personal life or your work.
Ain't that true? Okay, now we're going to jump back in and have some more heavy conversations about AI.
Whew.
I know. You feel refreshed?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
let's do it.
Deep. Here we go. I want to talk about your 4th stage, which is rewiring the organization. We've been talking before the break. We talked a lot about like the people aspect of making AI work in the organization. What are some hints that you have for organizations trying to do this?
I think it's don't do it all at once. And so the way I've envisioned it, and I think the succeeding or successful organizations do it this way, which is you've got to do this on a small scale. So start thinking in terms of value streams and funding those value streams. I like to use the example of a bank here. And banks serve a lot of different types of customers. And let's just say that you really want to focus on that post-graduation from college, early professional. So maybe you could just spin up one value stream that has all the people that you need to deliver the value to the customer from concept to cash in that value stream. Because what we know with AI is we start to get adjacent competencies. And so one of the challenges in Agile, since we're referencing that, was it was hard to create complete teams because you'd need like 1/8 of a designer. But I feel like the power of AI is that you can potentially make up for that 1/8 of a designer because you have a real designer creating the guardrails for your AI, and then other parts of the organization can spin that up. So start experimenting with these value streams. Think about what it takes to staff them. Think about what it takes to fund a value stream. Run those experiments in stage 3 and learn about what the constraints are, what upskilling looks like, what it means to do that in your organization. And then in stage 4, we start scaling that to other parts of the organization. And in that way, you can start shifting parts of the organization toward this new way of operating without disrupting everything at once.
So I think this is interesting because basically what you're talking about is experimentation with a purpose on a small scale before you scale it more broadly.
That's right.
And so organizations have probably been experimenting, which is the right thing, but maybe just in the wrong way.
Yeah, or not focused experimentation.
Or not focused experimentation.
Right. Yeah, with a goal. Like, okay, we know why we're doing this. We know what hypothesis we're trying to work toward, which is better communication, better flow of information, and faster time to market.
So I think what you're proposing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're basically talking about So the way that we describe it is organizing the people around the work instead of the work around the people.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're organizing people to get a piece of work done, or a value stream, as you're calling it, to get it sort of out the door. Most organizations are not set up that way. We see a little bit in, design and marketing, and we see some in tech, and we see some in consulting, but broadly, we're using the thing that Frederick Winslow Taylor put into place like 120 years ago. So
that's right.
Without tearing up everything, because that's a massive tear up to reorganize around the work. How do you suggest people start to do this within the structure that they have?
Well, I think it's like we talked about, where in your organization is it ripe for this? Usually there's either business units or there's a team of people who's just aching to organize in this way and break out of the bounds of Taylorism. I think the other part that we don't talk about enough is the funding mechanisms, because without changing the way people are incentivized, the funding mechanisms, we're just going to go back to our fiefdoms. If you fund marketing and if you fund IT, then it's tough if you're not funding that cross-functional value stream. And I like to say that culture follows the money. So change the money and you're going to change the culture.
Do you see organizations that have done that? Because I think it's a fascinating idea. We've seen examples over time. Gore does some of this. Saturn at Chevrolet for a while was doing something like this.
So I think there's two examples that are coming to mind. One is Zappos with their holacracy and their circles, and they just fund their circles. A little bit different, but similar in the same vein. The other one is Toyota. And they have some interesting funding around funding and taking a look at the entire customer journey from purchasing the car all the way through to manufacturing. I mean, that's a pretty ginormous value stream, but they understand that it's all connected. And so they've really worked to organize themselves in a way that when somebody orders the car, it's optimized throughout the value chain through to production. And I feel like the other example I'm going to tease is Unilever. They have an initiative with Walmart in Mexico, and they've optimized it where they've got their UPC codes coded into Walmart's system. So if somebody scans a shampoo bottle at checkout, Unilever knows that bottle is now off the shelf, and it flows through their entire supply chain to indicate demand.
Okay.
What I find interesting about this is if you think about a small organization, like in so many ways, an organization that has one product, maybe two, is often just by necessity set up something like this. And then as we scale, we begin to introduce these functions and these other silos. And I think it's a really good point around the money. When we've talked about building a skills-focused organization, the big pushback we always get is, well, how do I budget for that? How do I, if I don't have people in specific boxes? And so I just kind of wonder, to circle a little bit back to Danny's point, like if you're trying to get started on something like this, like where do you start? I mean, yes, there's some folks who really want to do it, but like, are there characteristics of those organizations that are a little bit more ready to try this?
Organizations or parts of organizations?
Parts of organizations within the broader company.
Yeah, I wish I had a list of characteristics for you. I think if you start going through the first stages of your AI journey and you start to see parts of the organization float to the top, our engineering team has really started to embrace a new way of working. They've figured out how to leverage AI. Let's push them a little bit farther. They've figured out agentic AI. If you really think about agentic AI, you naturally have to stitch together different parts of the organization in order to automate full workflows. And that gets back to that. I produced 400 different versions of this ad, but it got stuck in legal. So that's not a good place to start. But it's the part of the organization that's already crossed some of those boundaries and said, hey, we figured out how to create 400 ads. We figured out how to automate most of the legal approval outside of the exceptions. And then we figured out how to tie that into the product group so that they could do a review. All of a sudden, that to me would be a signal. This is an interesting part of the organization to start funding differently, to start asking them, how about if we ran this experiment in this part of the organization or with this part of the product or workflow?
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is in the book, I outline how budgeting itself has to change from yearly budgets into a much more dynamic way of budgeting. And when you think about that, you both said we're systems thinkers. One of the challenges that we face in the rewiring today is it's too much overhead to maintain more than one way of budgeting. With AI, that has a potential to change so that we can have much of the organization inching along and creating much more and more dynamic budgets. And we can have a system that funds some value stream experiments.
One more question, and then I want your drop dead gorgeous example. I want the best example in your book. But the final question is, we've seen organizations change a lot in the last 5 years. This is another grenade, basically, to how organizations have operated. I'm wondering, with the funding model like this and organizing around the work instead of the people, if there's a through line to keep the organization together and cohesive that you've seen in some of the organizations that are doing this, how are they hanging together with sort of different goals and different pockets?
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer for you. I know it's being done. I don't feel like I can point to one thing and say, this is how they're doing it, except for maybe the big example I'm going to share is an organization that has the culture to support that.
Okay.
And I know culture is one of those squishy things.
Well, they eat strategy for breakfast, I hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, your book has so many good examples, and I was listing them all. I think I even mentioned a few that I wanted you to mention. But we have time for like one really good example of an organization that's doing this well. Who is it?
Yeah.
And what are they doing?
I love pointing to Unilever, and there's several reasons. One is they're a soap company. Who thinks of a soap company like using AI and being an amazing leader in AI? And I think that they have this program, you guys are probably well familiar with it, the Future Fit program. And you're both nodding. So they're saying we have good people and we know we're going to have to reskill and upskill our people for the age of AI. Let's align people with their purpose and then reskill and upskill them for the age of AI. So I think that's an amazing program. I think that supply chain example of how do we organize around the value stream. They do something called digital twins, which is rather than doing the formulas in a lab to create a new soap, they will do it through AI, and then they will create a virtual twin of that product. They were doing this in Thailand, where they created a virtual version of the shampoo. They knew they could execute on it if it would sell. So they created a virtual shampoo bottle of it. They ran digital ads to see if there was pull for this particular shampoo. When they had the pull, then they were able to, only then did they put the formula in the lab to make sure that the shampoo would work and move it into production.
That is crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's super crazy.
So even if a soap company can do it, you can do it.
It's as easy as that.
Right.
We have to unfortunately wrap up. This has been such a good conversation, Melissa. Just 3 final questions. The first one is your one big piece of advice for organizations on this journey.
Yeah. Start small and grow. I mean, I know everybody says experiment and they don't. I'd like to just put bounds on that. Know why you're experimenting and know what your hypothesis is and know what you want to achieve with that experiment.
Very cool. We like that, being clear on your hypotheses and experimenting. So that's how we do our work. Danny and I are always looking for new ways to stay on top of AI. So I wanted to ask you, how are you staying on top of it now? And like, what are you reading? What are you listening to, et cetera?
Yeah. So everybody has their favorite thing. I know colleagues of mine who just love the podcast world and they'd probably rattle off a half a dozen podcasts. I'm kind of a newsletter gal, and one of the reasons is because I can set up automations to ingest all of these newsletters and summarize them for me. Nice. But it's things, there's one called TLDR, so Too Long Didn't Read. That's good. SmarterX, HumanX. Christopher Penn puts out a great newsletter. You know, if you're not following Ethan Mullick, he's another great luminary to follow. There's a lot of them out there. But, just do what you can to narrow it down and keep track of the people that you find interesting.
Final question. This is a question that we ask everybody on our podcast, and that is, why do you do the work that you do?
The people, of course. Yeah. I mean, I believe that there's a better way of working out there. And I believe that there's too much of Taylorism left over in our organizations. And I do believe that AI is finally the thing that will force the organizations to change. There's too much at stake.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks so much. What a great conversation.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening. If this podcast got you thinking differently about how work happens, that's what we're here for. We dig into these topics every week in our research and in the Red Thread community. The Red Thread community is a place where people, leaders, and practitioners come together to compare notes, share what's working, and maybe challenge those things that aren't working so well. You can join for free at redthreadresearch.com/membership. Or if you or your organization are ready to go deeper, take a look at our professional and our enterprise memberships. For professional tier, for listeners, you can use the promotional code STORIES, STORIES, for a 10% discount. And if you're a tech provider trying to make sense of this space, our tech consortium is where smart vendors are coming together to learn from each other and from the market. You'll find everything at redthreadresearch.com. I'm Danny Johnson. Thanks for listening and for caring about making work better.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.